No apologies. Welcome to the Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast. We are just a few hours after the Lions made their selection, and we got to break it down because there's been an interesting reaction. And I do think that taking a defensive tackle in the first round was going to potentially be polarizing for the Detroit Lions fan base. And it makes sense. Christian's here. Look, give us apologies if we delay a little bit. We're on just a couple hours of sleep. We're going wire to wire, bringing you all the insider analysis, videos, highlights of everything going on. The Lions even dropped Kirby Joseph on the media to have a conversation. Business is still happening with Aidan, Hutchinson, and Jameson Williams. So we'll probably touch on that as well at the end of the podcast. But we got to talk about it. The Detroit Lions made the selection. And it was an interesting board, right, Christian? As we're watching, you kind of had a feeling there were going to be some teams that wanted to trade down, make some moves. The Giants were a team that were talked about as being interested in making a move, and they potentially have set up the Falcons to do a lot of different things in the future. You look at it and you say, my goodness, the Falcons were willing to make a move to get some assets, and the Giants gave up a portion of their capital in the coming years to get Jackson Dart. So that impacted the Lions. As we watched, the draft kind of shook out where a lot of the targets in the mock drafts, the Gray Zables, the talented edge rushers were kind of off the board already. But there's still plenty of options today on Friday and Saturday in this draft. So the way the board shook out a little bit in regards to the talent, some of the key players that maybe you thought would fit with the Detroit Lions were not there. But they end up taking Tyleik Williams, a player we profiled, a player that was, clearly in the Big Ten, played big games, was a player that on film you could see what would appeal to the Detroit Lions, his run stuffing ability, his ability to anchor and have his way with some real talented offensive linemen. And he was able to really establish himself over his time at Ohio State. But I'm curious, what's your reaction to the pick? You've had some hours now to kind of gauge the reaction. You see where people are kind of critiquing it based on what the Lions really needed. And clearly we're going to talk about who went shortly after Williams that I think is also fueling some of the angst. But what's your reaction? You look at it now a couple hours. What asset did the Lions get by bringing in Tyleik Williams to the roster?
Well, they got a really good run-stuffing defender. I think that the biggest trait that he has going for him is just his ability to get off blocks and cause problems against opposing run games. And he uses his size very, very well in terms of just making it tough for opposing offensive linemen to move him. He's 334 pounds, or at least that's what he weighed in at the combine. And so he profiles as somebody who right now is going to be depth at the nose tackle position, but he also has the versatility to slide over to 3-tech and cause problems as well. And with Aleem McNeil expected to start or miss the start of the season, and who knows exactly how much time that entails him missing, I think Williams is a valuable depth addition right away. He doesn't have necessarily the polished pass rush game, but I think that Casey Rogers can develop that and bring the best out of him. So I do think this is a solid pick for the Lions. It doesn't have the immediate appeal that some of the other picks like an edge rusher would have, just because he's not the flashiest guy, and there were some guys still on the board who really, a couple of them are still available now as we start the second round. But I do think that the Lions knew what they wanted in terms of character fit, cultural fit, and then schematic fit as well. And I think Williams checks all those boxes. He probably was not going to be available at 60, and so the Lions made the pick when they did. And so I think that moving forward, we'll have to keep an eye on how he grows as a pass rusher particularly. But I think as far as instant impact goes, it's going to be against the run in rotational situations.
Yeah, clearly. Look, you knew that was a defensive tackle was a position. I thought the Lions were going to go edge or potential offensive line and defensive tackle edge in the second round, day 2 on Friday. But they found a player that they feel fits everything. Dan Campbell spoke to Fox 2 and indicated that they really like everything that he brings to the table in terms of his effort level, grit, football knowledge, mindset. So you got to remember that the Lions will sacrifice a certain level of talent. Look, the guy's got to be able to play. If they see, I think they value intangibles, football IQ, the opportunity to fit in with the teammates, how fast he could endear himself with the locker room. They value that almost as high as the talent. The player still has to have talent, but I see where some of the complaints lie based on what the projections were. And look, rankings are subjective, and it's something to monitor as he starts his Detroit Lions career. But we do have to acknowledge what the world is saying, and it's fair. Look, there are fans that did not like the pick, and that's fine. I love that. That was what I had talked about in a lot of appearances that I made. I'm so thankful that others want to have Lions on SI on their platform. And I said, yeah, fans should be passionate. There is no way that no Lions fan is going to legislate the community. There's going to be some people who look to a Mel Kiper or a Daniel Jeremiah who said in our Lions on SI reaction piece, which you can find, that they felt like maybe Tyleik Williams could have been selected in the second round, that maybe the Lions reached for a player that maybe could have been available at a different spot. Maybe the Lions could have selected a linebacker that we'll talk about shortly, but they feel like, you know what, maybe the Lions could have taken an offer to trade down a couple spots and still select Tyleik Williams later and acquire additional assets. So I understand the complaints. I respect them. I don't feel the need to gain universal praise. You're not going to get it. You can tell people to calm down 1,000 times. They're not. They're going to have their opinion and they're going to share it. It's interesting discourse because the reasons that the fans gave that don't like the pick are valid. That maybe there would have been a gamble that would have been needed to potentially move down, but the Lions don't want to take that gamble. They wanted their guy. Brad Holmes said it was their top target. And why would you, if you're seeing somebody that you like and you want to go and acquire that talent, maybe you could have, taken a gamble and seen based on the board, but the Lions are particular. They didn't want to take that gamble. So analysts are saying potentially, Christian, that the Lions reached. Do you agree? What do you make of the notion that maybe, others had him ranked as like the 6th or 7th best defensive tackle, that they could have potentially gotten more value by selecting him later, maybe even potentially him being available at number 60?
I don't know that he would have been available at number 60, but I do think, you get into that mid-50s range. I think you don't really know. The longer we go on with the draft, the more unpredictable it seems it gets. And so I think he would have been a candidate to go anywhere from the mid-40s to the Lions pick at 60 had he fallen into the second round. And so, the Lions weren't on the clock again until 60. You don't want to give a bunch of draft picks to move up in the second round, and you got the player that you liked. So it's hard to fault them on that aspect. But I did think a couple of things that were said by analysts were interesting. Daniel Jeremiah, during the NFL Network broadcast, said that he didn't think that Williams would go this early. It was a little bit early for him. But you dig into it and you start to see the fit that he brings to Detroit. And it's hard not to like what some of the analysts said. Mel Kiper not as high on the pick, but Dane Brugler from The Athletic talked about how pre-snap as a defensive lineman, it's kind of a poker game where you're trying to figure out how is the offense going to attack us? Where are the blockers going? Where's the run going? And he said that Tyleik Williams is one of the more advanced players in that aspect of the game. So he's smart, and that's what the Lions are looking for. He's going to be able to translate his skills as a run defender very early in his career. So I'm really excited to see that in terms of just how well he knows the game and how knowledgeable he is of opposing run schemes. Todd McShay thinks it's a really good fit from the Ringer, talking about how Williams is, quote, actually best suited to play nose tackle in a one-gap heavy scheme, end quote. That's exactly what the Lions do. And he's going to be able to learn from DJ Reader, who's been one of the best in the business at that position. And by the way, he's on the last year of his contract. If they elect to keep Williams at nose tackle, there's a starting spot for him to fill in if they don't bring back Reader next year. So there's a lot to like about the potential fit. I know some analysts weren't as high on it just in terms of value. But, like you said, the talent is subjective. The big boards are all subjective, and everybody has players ranked differently. He wasn't a first-round grade, in my opinion, but when you really dig in and you see about how he is specific to the Lions, then you start to understand the excitement about the pick a little bit. So he's intriguing. I think that this could go one of two ways. Either he's a rotational guy. I don't think he's going to be flashy in year one, but I do think there's some upside there. And with some development, he can become a really good player.
Yeah, and you have to think about it too, that, maybe it went differently. The board for the Lions might have went differently had Lee McNeil not suffered a catastrophic ACL injury. So you assume that, the writing's on the wall for Broderick Martin to step up his game. Clearly, they bring in two defensive tackles to potentially upgrade what the Lions are trying to do along the defensive line. You have DJ Reader. So it's a pretty clear shot to Broderick Martin that if you don't have the training camp that this coaching staff is expecting, the days on the roster could be numbered for a former third-round pick. An acknowledgement. It's quite frankly, an acknowledgement that that pick might not have been exactly where it needed to be in the development. It's going to take time. So the Lions clearly have to move forward, and they picked up Roy Lopez and now Tyleik Williams. Now, here's where some angst comes in because, clearly the Eagles have now established themselves as a premier marquee franchise that can overhaul talent, that can rebuild and have some downfalls, have some lean years, and then rebuild again. So Howie Roseman now is widely considered and correctly considered the best general manager in the National Football League. So you watch intently what Howie Roseman does. What moves is he making? How is he slithering through this operation? And then you look at it and you say, how does he continue to get lucky to have good players continuously fall right in his lap? And so part of the angst, I believe, from the supporters, which is fine if you believe that, it's up to Tyleik Williams to go out on the field and prove what he's about. But Jihaad Campbell is a player that a lot of people, when they saw the film, they see the pre-draft rankings, they see what he's able to do with his athletic score and what he's about. They felt like he could have been a fit. At that spot, Christian, the Lions passed on some good edge rushers. They passed on Donovan Ezuraku, passed on Mike Green, who many people felt. Pierce was a player that many people liked, but he got taken earlier, so he was not on the board. Golden got taken. Matthew Golden got taken a little bit earlier, so he was not available. But there were edge rushers you could have taken, as well as Jihaad Campbell. And guess where Campbell lands up? With the defending, the reigning Super Bowl champion, Philadelphia Eagles. And when you see that, people go, oh, man, that it just makes things a little bit more difficult. There's angst because the Commanders shored up their offensive line with their draft pick. You see the Bears picking up an offensive weapon. So there's a little bit of angst. I get it. It's fair, I think, to question a little bit some moves. But specifically, speak to Jihaad Campbell, what he could bring to the Eagles. And was there a player that the Lions passed on that they maybe should have selected at number 28 instead of Tyleik Williams? What do you think? Should the Lions have taken Jihaad Campbell or somebody else?
Well, I will say that Jihaad Campbell was one of my favorite players still on the board when it was their turn to pick at 28th overall. So I would not have hated that at all. I do think that he has a lot of upside. And I think that one thing that makes him really unique is just how well he moves in open space and how well he covers tight ends down the field. So those are both things that the Lions could have benefited from adding. I'm not going to dispute that. I think Jihaad Campbell would have been a very good player for the Lions. He's going to be a very good player for the Eagles. And it's a tough pill to swallow when you see a good player like that get passed on by the Lions and then land with a team like Philadelphia, who has such a great track record of not only finding talent in the draft, but developing it and getting the best out of it. So yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow. I think that Jihaad Campbell is going to really help the Philadelphia Eagles. There are some injury things. Is he going to be ready for training camp at the start of the year? But he's going to a situation in Philadelphia where he doesn't have to feel that pressure of coming in and being the guy right away. And so that's tough. Like, he's going to be really, really good for them, I think. And yeah, I would have liked to have seen the Lions maybe take a chance on him. But I think that the difference is that he wouldn't have had that type of impact immediately. However, the Lions do have a bunch of linebackers either in the last year of their contract or on one-year deals. Guys like Alex Anzalone in the final year of his deal. Malcolm Rodriguez is in the final year of his deal. So maybe the Lions passing on Jihaad Campbell seems to indicate that they plan to extend Alex Anzalone. I don't know. Anzalone's a cultural, he's the guy. He's a defensive captain. I don't foresee him playing in another uniform just with how much they like him. So I would be shocked if the Lions let Alex Anzalone get away. And maybe because of that, they didn't feel like Campbell would be able to help them in the same way that Williams does. As far as other guys to target, I'm a big fan of Nicky Manwari, and we can get into a lot of these guys when we talk about later who the Lions could trade up for. But just to name a few, Manwari and Ezuraku are the two that I thought were really in play at 28, and I expect them to fly off the board on day 2.
Makes sense. The Lions have options. Again, they could have traded out of the first round. They could have moved up. But I think this draft presented itself where I think it lined up where the guy that they wanted was there at 28, and they made the decision. And you have to now stick by it. Brad Holmes evaluated, the coaching staff evaluated. You got to remember, too, Casey Rogers had a say in this move, and they probably looked at the big games that Tyleik Williams was involved in at Ohio State and felt like, okay, he was able to do some things. And also, too, this is not the end of Tyleik Williams' development. They expect him to develop his pass rush skills. They say, okay, the starting point of, hey, solid against the run, that shows effort, that shows grit, that shows competitiveness, football IQ. Now, coaching will involve him. Now they got to see what he can do when he eventually gets to the program and starts to develop, and hopefully his pass rush skills can evolve, and what the Lions can take advantage of is his flexibility and versatility to play a couple different spots, whether it be nose tackle or the three technique. It'll be interesting to see how he looks early in his career. But we talked about it. Here we are Friday. And what's good is, you and I are sleep deprived, and we're grinding through all the insights and bringing everybody knowledge from Allen Park. But the draft goes on. There's more than just the pick of Tyleik Williams. There's 7 more, maybe less. But the Lions still got 2 picks on Friday at this point in time. 1 pick in the second round, 1 pick in the third round. Brad Holmes, do we really want to wait around a couple hours into the draft to wait to number 60? I'm sensing potentially, based on what he was saying, there could be some players that Brad Holmes could potentially package probably the 60th pick with another pick, maybe in the 7th round, to move up to a spot, and then maybe acquire a 5th round pick so that you iron out and get 7 total picks. Who are the players that you listed that the Lions maybe say, hey, we like them and we don't want to wait to 60 to go get?
Well, when I was exploring it, I tried to go with a bunch of different positions just because you never know with Brad Holmes exactly what his plan is. I think if they want to go offense, a guy you need to keep an eye on is Jaden Higgins. He's a big-bodied, 6'4" wide receiver, not afraid to run block. He fits the Lions in terms of that. He's got really good hands, and he runs 4.47. So I think that Jaden Higgins is a guy where if you really want to go get a wide receiver, that's your guy. I think Donovan Ezeraku is an obvious choice. He's one of the best. Him and Mike Green are the 2 best edge rushers still available. Mike Green has the off-field concerns. So if you're looking for a guy that more so fits the Lions, I think Ezeraku is your guy. So he would be one to keep an eye on. Nicky Manwari, I already mentioned, as a safety. A lot of talent there. He's super athletic, can play all over. I think the best version of Nicky Manwari is like what Ifeatu Melifonwu brought the Lions on steroids, just because of how athletic he is and how well he can really do a lot of things. He can blitz, he can play in the box, and then he can play over the top as a free safety as well. If they want to go linebacker, I think Carson Schlesinger is the name you need to keep an eye on because he is a sideline-to-sideline guy. I think he had 90 solo tackles, and he's just aggressive. He plays fearless, and he's a former walk-on, so he fits the Lions' grit type of mentality as well. There's a lot to like about the potential of Carson Schlesinger coming to Detroit for all the reasons I just mentioned with all the linebackers that are in the last year of team control. So if they do expect to move on from 1 or 2 of those guys, Schlesinger's a guy that makes a lot of sense. If you want to go offensive line, I'll give you a couple of names as well. Marcus Mbao from Purdue. He's a guard. He might be there at 60, but if the Lions don't want to take a chance making a small move up 5 or 6 spots to ensure you get your guy, I think that'd be a really good move. I might butcher this name, so I apologize, but Jonah Savanaya from Arizona has some versatility. Offensive tackle, offensive guard, which is it for the Lions doesn't really matter. He gives you depth at either position, and you can really allow him to develop if you feel good about Christian Mahogany starting at least right away. So those are just a few names. I mean, we can keep getting into it. Jack Sawyer is a guy who maybe you don't feel great about him being at 60. Make a small move up to go ensure you get him. And then if you want to go corner, I know Brad Holmes loves his corners, so I'm going to give you 2 names, guys that are physical, not afraid to press. They use their hands really well. They're fluid movers. I think Trey Amos from Ole Miss and Siobhan Ravel from East Carolina, both super physical guys that could attract the Lions' attention. And also, real quick before I move on, Will Johnson's still out there. There's been some concerns about the knee and medicals popped up, and that's why he fell out of the first round. If he's still sitting there at 60 and you're Brad Holmes and your love for cornerbacks, why not take a chance on Will Johnson with the 60th overall pick? That's a first-round talent that you get at the end of the second round. So where he lands is going to be super intriguing.
All right, Christian. No, look, this started as kind of silliness online, but we look at it and we say, you know what? This is a player that fell out of the first round, comes with a lot of noise, and there's controversy regarding his skill level. But I think him dropping might add to his ability to focus in, to prove people wrong that, hey, you're not going to be given anything. And now look, we're entertaining this because we're in the entertaining business and interesting, and we want to explore all ideas. Nothing is crazy, but it's unlikely. Okay, so for all the naysayers out there, this is very unlikely. I would be surprised if this is happening, not reporting anything. But you look at a player of his caliber, you say, okay, is he better than Hendon Hooker right now? Maybe on par, but maybe clearly Sanders might have a higher career upside based on his lineage. Maybe I think he lands around the 50s, maybe just ahead of the Lions. But I'm curious. Riddle me this. If he's there at 60, would you entertain the idea? If best player available and you know that there's still some good edge rushers later on, any chance you entertain the saga of bringing in one of the most polarizing figures? Shedeur Sanders. What do you think? Am I too wild on this? Do I have to go back and get some more coffee?
Hard pass. I don't see, like, the Lions are never a need-based drafting team, so I guess I won't 100% rule it out, but I think it would be bizarre, especially if you get to 60 and there's talents out there that would be a better fit to help you right away. Then that's what you have to do. And as fun as it would be, I'm not going to lie, it would be fun to take a chance on another quarterback to compete with Hendon Hooker and give you insurance behind Jared Goff. I just don't see Shedeur Sanders as that fit. He has some things that, like, he can process, like he does have decent arm strength, but I just don't. There's some seasoning there that he needs to develop into the type of guy that I would be willing to add to the Lions quarterback room. If for some reason it's a Malik Willis type of fall and he gets into the third or the fourth round, then maybe you start to seriously consider it. But at this stage, I think if the Lions are going to add a quarterback, it should be late or early day 3, late day 3, or maybe if there's a good priority free agent out there that you like. But I just think that with the talent that's still going to be available, just looking at the big boards and the guys that are still on there and are in the top 60, I think there's a lot of guys out there that could help the Lions more than Shedeur Sanders.
All right, now let's look at what could happen. If the Lions stay, they don't maneuver too much today. Day 2, who would be potentially, we're going to release a mock draft on Friday as well. Who are the picks, in your opinion? Who do you think the Lions could target in round 2 and round 3? 2 picks if they stay today on Friday, day 2.
Yeah, so I did something fun with my mock draft, and that'll come out this afternoon. I did 3 different scenarios that the Lions could face on day 2. The first one just being standing pat. And in that one, in the second round, I had the Lions selecting edge rusher Femi Oladejo from UCLA. I think he's probably got the best shot of being there at 60 amongst the guys that the Lions seem to like. He's a converted linebacker who could develop a little bit as a pass rusher. But again, you're just betting on your coaching staff to get the best out of these guys. And Campbell speaks very highly of Casey Rogers. And so you have to have some confidence that somebody who has this upside that has not been tapped into yet can come to Detroit and develop and get better. And I think that there's a serious upside with him as far as what you could potentially get from a player like Femi Oladejo. In my second scenario with the second round, I had the Lions trading up into the first round for the 40th overall selection, trading with the New Orleans Saints. And I have them trading up for Donovan Ezeraku, the edge rusher out of Boston College. A lot that we've already said about Ezeraku, but one of the most productive pass rushers in college football last year. He was an All-American. I know some scouts weren't super high on his ability to defend the run, but again, you're taking a chance on your coaching staff and really betting that they can get the most out of him. And then in my third scenario, I had the Lions trading out of the second round, picking up an early third-round pick from the Cleveland Browns, who in that scenario, Shedeur Sanders still on the board. They trade up to get him in the late second round. And in that scenario, I had the Lions making 2 third-round picks. the first of which being TCU wide receiver Jack Bech. Jack Bech has been compared to Puka Nacua with how good of a route runner he is. He doesn't have the flashy speed. He's not going to be a gigantic jump ball threat, but he's a hard worker. He does a lot of the little things well, and he just screams a fit for the Lions system and the way they do things, because he's going to come in from day one and work hard. He's going to develop, and he's going to be reliable, and he's going to be super motivated. He had to deal with tragedy this offseason, and the way he has handled that and responded shows the type of person he is. I think Jack Bech would be a perfect fit for the Lions if he's still on the board in that situation. So those are just some of the names. Obviously, the guys we talked about trading up for, like Higgins or Savanea, are good options. Landon Jackson's another guy that I really contemplated. Is he going to be there at 60? I don't know. He's also somebody worthy of a small trade up as well. So there's a lot of options, particularly at the edge position. And I also think you could see them go offensive line on or in the third round, just because that class really starts to thin out after that kind of top 100, top 120 guys. So I think that you could see them potentially go after an offensive lineman. Somebody like Charles Grant from William and Mary late in the third round, I think is a good option for them.
Yeah, and then a couple names that have fallen that maybe could fit too. In the second round, I think Nick Scarton is somebody that could be there. You never know with Mike Green where he ends up landing. I'm curious to see how far the potential problem that has arisen maybe has caused Mike Green to fall. So I'm curious to see if that situation plays itself out. And then with the safety spot with depth, Jonas Sanker,
yes,
I think is a safety that people definitely are paying attention to. I have him in my mock draft. So I'm very curious to see if the Lions do target an offensive lineman on day 2, or if they continue to look at the defense, which could be a defensive heavy draft for the Lions because there's some depth along the offensive line. Now, one piece of business, the Detroit Lions officially picked up the 5th-year option of both Aidan Hutchinson and Jameson Williams, which means that they now are under team control officially until the end of the 2026 season. Both are eligible to receive a long-term extension if both parties agree. I think that you and I are in lockstep that we believe that Aidan Hutchinson is more in line this summer to get another hefty payday, as well as Kirby Joseph to follow Kirby Joseph's mega deal. I think that I'm curious to see if Aidan Hutchinson is going to be market setting based on the injury and things like that. It could be. But officially, the Lions are continuing their working relationship with Aidan Hutchinson, Jameson Williams. And I think that based on what their productivity level is, based on what they bring to the organization, not terribly surprising that the duo got their 5th-year option exercised.
Yeah, no, I think this is a strictly procedural move. The deadline was coming up. They ensure that Jameson Williams and Aidan Hutchinson will both be under team control through 2026. So I think the next step is, do either of these guys get extensions done? I think Hutchinson, based on the way everybody's talked, at some point will sign a contract extension. And based on the Lions timeline and how they handled things with Penei Sewell and Amon-Ra St. Brown last year and now Kirby Joseph, that could be coming soon. That could be coming at any point. Who knows? I know Rod Wood said at the luncheon prior to the draft that they expect Aidan Hutchinson to be around for the long haul. So I would be less than shocked if Aidan Hutchinson gets an extension done before the start of mandatory minicamp OTAs. Maybe it takes into the summer, but I wouldn't expect Hutchinson to hold out or anything like that. If that's the case and it takes a little bit longer. Obviously, they're going to have to devote a hefty amount of money with the way the market is at the edge position. And then Jameson Williams' future is a little bit more murky, but Brad Holmes shut down the potential of the team taking calls for Jameson Williams Thursday night. He said that hasn't happened, and that's not a conversation that him and Dan Campbell have had. So I would at least expect Jameson Williams to be on the roster through the end of this year, and then maybe we have this discussion again prior to the 2026 draft, the 2026 season. But it sounds like Jameson Williams' future, the immediate future with Jameson Williams is pretty stable right now. And the Lions ensure another year of contract control for both of their first-round picks.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to our first draft recap of day 1. We'll probably come back probably at the conclusion of the draft on Sunday evening or Monday. So we'll have more of a sense of how the draft looks in total, undrafted free agents, grades, all that in-depth breakdown the next time we have a conversation. Thanks, Christian, for entertaining the idea of doing a podcast so soon after the selection of Tyleik Williams. Make sure, everybody, to find the landing page where you can get all the Lions on SI draft coverage, or Continue to follow at Detroit Podcast on X and Twitter, where you can get the live updates of everything going on at Allen Park, live updates regarding the picks, grades, what's the reaction, what's the buzz, and feel free to message. If you have a thought, if you agree with me, great. If you don't agree with me, great. Not penning any open letters to anybody. Give you an opinion, share why, and if you like it, great. And if you don't like it, that's great too. But we'll always be here to answer why we wrote what we wrote or say what we say. Whether you like it or you don't like it, Lions on SI and the Lone Wolves podcast are going to be here firing it up to have discussions for the Detroit Lions. Thanks for everybody paying attention. Appreciate it. Let's have some conversations. Let us know at Detroit Podcast what you think. And the draft rolls on for the Detroit Lions.